The sound of metal scraping against concrete at 3 in the morning is not something you expect when you own a house in what the HOA brochure once proudly described as a peaceful, secure community. Yet there it was, echoing down my driveway like a thief's alarm clock. At first, I thought maybe it was raccoons raiding my trash cans again, but when I looked through the upstairs window, I caught the beam of a flashlight cutting across my garage door. That was the moment I knew it wasn't a raccoon, unless raccoons had recently taken to wearing perfume strong enough to choke a horse. And then I saw her. Karen. My neighbor, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, straining her shoulders against the keypad on my garage door like she was about to storm the beaches of Normandy. Now, I have to explain something before this makes sense. A few months earlier, I'd bought myself a Bentley. Not just any Bentley. A glossy, deep blue Continental GT that looked like the kind of car you'd see parked in front of a Monaco casino. It wasn't some midlife crisis splurge either. I'd saved for years, worked longer hours than were sane, and when I drove it home for the first time, I thought I'd earned at least one quiet joy. But the Bentley didn't sit quietly for long. In fact, it became the neighborhood's main conversation topic within 24 hours, especially for Karen. Karen didn't hate the car because it was loud or parked illegally. She hated it because it wasn't hers. Her husband had a sensible Lexus. She drove a white Escalade with HOA stickers plastered across the bumper like campaign signs, and my Bentley made her feel like royalty was living next door while she was stuck at Duchess level. The woman had been passive-aggressively circling my driveway for weeks, always managing to comment. "Beautiful car, shame it doesn't fit with the community aesthetic," she'd sneer, or, "Such an extravagant choice, maybe too extravagant for this neighborhood." When she ran out of insults, she shifted to rules, muttering about garage space, driveway length, and the HOA's vague ban on non-harmonious property displays. So when I saw her prying at my garage keypad, flashlight trembling, I knew she'd decided my Bentley had crossed from non-harmonious to hers by right. I slipped on a sweatshirt, grabbed my phone, and walked quietly down the stairs. It was surreal, watching her from the peephole as she finally punched in some random combination, growled when it didn't work, and yanked at the handle like sheer entitlement would override the lock. I could have called the cops right then. But some part of me wanted to see just how far she'd go. So I opened the door and let the porch light wash over her. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice calm, like I'd caught a neighbor borrowing sugar instead of breaking into my garage. Karen whipped around, eyes wide, then narrowed into that glare only Karen seemed to master. "You need to fix your keypad," she snapped, as if I was inconveniencing her. "It's malfunctioning." I leaned against the doorframe. "Strange. It works fine when I use it. Then again, I know the code." She sniffed, clearly deciding whether to double down or retreat. Of course, she doubled down. "The HOA has received complaints about you storing inappropriate items. I'm here to verify." "Inappropriate items? You mean my car?" Her lip curled. "Don't be ridiculous. The HOA rules clearly state that large, ostentatious vehicles must be stored appropriately. I need to check if yours is being stored properly." I almost laughed. It was 3 in the morning, she was trespassing on my property, and her defense was, "The HOA made me do it." But instead of laughing, I pulled my phone from my pocket and casually waved it. "Smile for the camera." That shook her for half a second, but she recovered quickly. "If you have nothing to hide, let me in. Otherwise, I'll report this at the next meeting." I could have told her to leave. I could have called the sheriff and had her cuffed right there. But then I remembered the tiny upgrade I'd made to the garage last year, a reinforced smart lock system with a little quirk. If you didn't enter the right code after the door opened, the system automatically triggered a lock-in sequence. It was originally designed for extra security during power outages, but I'd tested it once and realized it turned the garage into a very effective cage. "All right," I said smoothly, opening the garage with my phone app. The heavy door rolled upward with a groan, revealing the Bentley gleaming under the overhead light. "Go ahead." Inspect. Her eyes lit up like a child at Christmas. She stepped forward, high heels clicking on the concrete, and circled the car like a jeweler examining a diamond. It's taking up far too much space, she said. This might even be a safety hazard. I'll need to confiscate it. Confiscate? I raised an eyebrow. Yes, she said, as if this was perfectly logical. The HOA has authority to remove problem property. I'll have it towed. She reached out, fingers grazing the Bentley's door handle like it already belonged to her. That was when the lock-in system quietly engaged. With a soft metallic click, the garage door lowered itself behind her, and the side exit locked. Karen glanced back, startled, just in time to watch the last sliver of moonlight disappear as the door shut. "Wait, what is this?" she demanded, tugging at the handle. It didn't budge. She spun toward me, fury written across her face. "Open this door right now." I stayed exactly where I was, leaning against the frame, watching her through the small interior window in the door. "Funny thing about breaking into someone else's garage," I said calmly. "Sometimes the garage doesn't want to let you out." Karen pounded on the inside of the garage door like she was trying to summon reinforcements. "This is illegal. You can't trap me in here." "Illegal? You mean like trespassing on private property?" I asked. She froze, hands still raised, then let it drop slowly. For the first time that night, her bravado cracked. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. She was trapped, her authority useless, her carefully polished Escalade parked outside powerless to save her. And the best part was, I didn't have to raise my voice or lift a finger. All I had to do was wait. I checked the time on my phone. 3:15. "Well, Karen," I said lightly, "looks like you've got the garage to yourself for a while. Don't worry, it's climate-controlled. Try not to scratch the Bentley." Her scream echoed off the concrete walls, but the locks didn't care. And neither did I. That was only the beginning. Karen's scream that night didn't stop when the garage door sealed shut. It bounced off the walls, jagged and sharp, rattling the Bentley's polished surface. I stood in the doorway long enough to make sure she wasn't about to pass out, then turned back inside and poured myself a glass of water. It was absurdly calm in my kitchen compared to the chaos raging a few feet away. If you've ever watched a toddler pitch a tantrum in a supermarket aisle, multiply that energy by 40 years of bottled-up entitlement and wedge it inside a garage with no exit. That was what I was dealing with. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had spent months lecturing me about the HOA's values, telling me I should consider how my car lowered the neighborhood's harmony index. Now she was the one trapped like a criminal, shrieking accusations into a space designed to keep property safe. My phone buzzed with security alerts as the system dutifully recorded her flailing attempts to force the door. She kicked the concrete once, realized it hurt more than the garage, and resorted to pacing in furious circles. I might have left her in there until morning, but I wasn't entirely without mercy. Around 4 o'clock, I cracked the door an inch and slid in a bottle of water. Her eyes flashed at me like I'd offered poison. "You can't keep me here," she barked, snatching the bottle anyway. "Funny," I said, "because you broke in here. Technically, the system's just protecting what's mine. Seems fair." "Fair," she spat. "I am an elected HOA officer. This is obstruction. Kidnapping. You'll be in jail before sunrise." Her voice wavered on that last line. She knew she had crossed into dangerous territory. I didn't bother correcting her that no one had elected her. She'd bullied and campaigned until people got tired of hearing her name and gave her the position. Instead, I let her stew while I went back to bed, my phone chiming with each motion alert as she stomped in outrage. By dawn, I released her. The door whirred upward, spilling golden light across the garage. She stormed out like a storm cloud with mascara streaks, muttering curses. But she didn't leave. No, Karen had too much pride for that. She marched to my porch, jabbed a finger in my chest, and hissed, "You'll regret this. The entire HOA will hear about your unlawful imprisonment." I smiled. Perfect. Make sure you describe how you got locked in. Every detail. Her jaw snapped shut. For once, she had no comeback. She spun on her heel and stomped home, leaving behind a trail of gravel crunches and empty threats. I thought maybe, just maybe, that humiliation would buy me a week of peace. I was wrong. 2 days later, the HOA board convened an emergency session. Emergency, in their terms, usually meant a neighbor planted the wrong flowers or left a trash can on the curb too long. This time it was me. When I walked into the clubhouse, Karen was already perched at the head table like a queen on a shaky throne. The other board members sat stiffly beside her, their faces arranged in varying degrees of discomfort. She started before I sat down. "This homeowner," she declared, jabbing a manicured finger toward me, "has violated multiple community standards, endangered public safety, and unlawfully detained an officer of this association." The room buzzed with murmurs. Some neighbors leaned forward, hungry for gossip. Others rolled their eyes. I caught old Mr. Harlan smirking into his coffee, which told me at least one person enjoyed the show. I kept my tone even. "Would anyone like to see the security footage?" Karen's face drained a shade paler. I pulled out my phone and tapped the app. The screen filled with grainy night vision footage. Karen fumbling with the keypad, forcing the handle, slipping inside like a burglar. The audio crackled with her declaring she was there to confiscate my car. The gasps around the room were worth every second of sleep I'd lost. She leapt to her feet. "That is taken out of context." "Sure," I said. "The context being you trespassing at 3 a.m.? One of the board members cleared his throat. "Karen, this looks compromising." "Compromising?" she shrieked. "He lured me into that garage. He engineered a trap." Several heads turned toward me, waiting. I sipped my water. "Yes. My garage is designed to lock when intruders enter without authorization. I suppose you could call it a trap, but then again, it's on my property." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Karen realized she was losing control and doubled down. "He's flaunting a vehicle that lowers our property values. The HOA rules clearly state." "Actually," interrupted Harlan, finally speaking, "the rules don't say a damn thing about cars, just boats and RVs. I wrote that section myself back in '92. Karen blinked, mouth opening and closing like a fish. The silence that followed was so delicious I nearly laughed. But she wasn't finished. Karen never was. She slammed her folder shut and announced, "If the board refuses to act, then I will pursue legal remedies. No one humiliates me and gets away with it." With that, she stormed out, heels clicking, Escalade roaring to life seconds later. The board adjourned quickly after that. Most of the neighbors avoided eye contact, muttering about not wanting to get involved. But I knew Karen. The humiliation had burned her pride raw. She'd tasted public embarrassment, and rather than lick her wounds, she'd plot her revenge. The first sign came that evening. I walked out to retrieve my mail and found an envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no address, just bold marker, "Notice of pending action." Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "Property seizure request," typed in clumsy fonts. No legal letterhead, no lawyer's name. Just Karen's signature at the bottom, scrawled like a queen decreeing exile. I laughed all the way back inside. But laughter didn't stop her next move. The following morning, a tow truck idled in front of my house. The driver leaned against the hood, chewing gum, looking confused. "You the guy with the Bentley?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Got a call from the HOA president. Said the car's gotta go." I shook my head. "That's funny, because the HOA president lives 3 blocks away and drives a Prius. Want to guess who really called?" The man scratched his neck, realizing. "So, no tow." "No tow." He shrugged and climbed back into the truck. Karen's Escalade appeared at the corner just in time to see her plan fall apart. The tow truck rolled off, leaving her red-faced and furious. She didn't stop, though. She parked in front of my driveway and marched toward me like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You can't keep winning," she hissed. "You think this is funny, but you're destroying this community." "Karen," I said, voice flat, "if you break into my property again, I won't bother with security footage. I'll call the sheriff." For a flicker of a moment, I thought she might actually strike me. Her hand twitched, then fell limp at her side. She spun and climbed back into her Escalade, peeling out so hard the tires squealed. That was the moment I realized she was dangerous, not just annoying. She'd crossed into obsession. This wasn't about the Bentley anymore. It was about power, control, and saving face after the garage debacle. I locked up tight that night. Checked every camera twice. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. Karen had made it her mission to break me, and people like her didn't stop until they were forced to. By the third night, my phone notifications had become a sort of white noise. Motion detected at the front gate. Motion detected by the driveway. Motion detected by the garage. Every time I checked, it was either a stray cat or Karen's Escalade creeping past like a shark circling chum. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. She slowed down, headlights washing over my lawn, sometimes pausing just long enough to let me know she was there. It was intimidation theater, the kind of thing meant to make you lose sleep. And truth be told, it was working. I kept my shoes by the door, phone fully charged, and security system armed tighter than Fort Knox. The first real strike came at dawn. I stepped out to grab the newspaper. Yes, I'm one of the last dinosaurs who still reads a physical paper, and nearly tripped over a bright orange sticker slapped across my front door. Property violation notice. It read, stamped with the HOA logo and an indecipherable signature that looked suspiciously like Karen's. The violation? Improper storage of oversized vehicle leading to community disruption. I peeled it off and laughed, but then I noticed half my neighbors had wandered outside to check their mail. They all glanced at me, then at the sticker and back again. Karen had played it smart. She didn't just want to find me, she wanted to brand me. To make me look like the problem child of the neighborhood. I went back inside, crumpled the notice, and decided it was time to get proactive. Instead of waiting for Karen to escalate, I'd beat her at her own game. That afternoon, I attended the next HOA open discussion session. Usually these meetings were sparsely attended, with Karen dominating the room. But word of her garage debacle had spread, and curiosity drew a crowd. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point fingers. I simply connected my phone to the projector and played a montage of Karen's recent antics. Breaking into my garage, stalking in her Escalade, posting fake violation notices, even the tow truck confrontation caught on camera. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector fan. When the video ended, I turned to the board. "I don't mind following rules," I said calmly. "But what I do mind is harassment. If this is what we call leadership, then maybe it's time we ask ourselves who's really disrupting the harmony here." For a moment I thought I'd won. Some people even clapped. But Karen wasn't finished. She stood up, red-faced but defiant. "This is character assassination. He has manipulated footage, twisted events, and turned you against me. If we let this behavior slide, what's next? Gates torn down? Strangers moving in unchecked? Our property values will plummet." The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them murmured something about needing to review bylaws. Karen seized the lifeline and added, "In fact, I've already drafted a motion to restrict the storage of exotic vehicles. For safety." And just like that, she reframed the conversation. I walked out knowing I had scored points, but she'd planted a seed that could sprout into a rule targeting me specifically. 2 days later, the retaliation hit harder. I woke up to the sound of grinding metal. When I rushed outside, I found a set of heavy construction barriers blocking my driveway. Bright yellow, bolted into the asphalt like a prison gate. At first, I thought maybe the city was doing roadwork, but there were no permits, no signs, no workers. Just barriers. and Karen standing across the street with a coffee cup, watching like she was admiring her handiwork. "Good morning," she called sweetly. "Safety improvement project. Can't have dangerous vehicles rolling out without warning." I clenched my jaw. "Remove them. They're community property now," she said. "For everyone's protection." That was the breaking point. I called the sheriff. When the deputies arrived, Karen turned on the waterworks, sobbing about being a concerned neighbor protecting children from speeding. But the deputies weren't buying it. They checked the barriers, found no permits, and informed her she had 24 hours to remove them or face fines. Her mask slipped then. She glared at me, voice dropping low enough for only me to hear. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." I believed her. That evening my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my next-door neighbor, a quiet guy named Sam, holding an envelope. "Found this on my porch," he said. Inside was a printed flyer with my face photoshopped onto a mugshot background. The caption read, "Dangerous neighbor. Violates HOA rules. Approach with caution." I stared at it, half amused, half stunned. "She's unhinged." Sam shrugged. "We know. But she's loud, and people listen to loud." The next week became a blur of psychological warfare. Karen filed noise complaints when I mowed my lawn at noon. She claimed my trash bins were 3 inches too close to the curb. She even called animal control, alleging my non-existent dog barked all night. Each complaint fizzled, but each one chipped away at my patience. It was death by 1,000 cut. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. One night, around midnight, I heard the unmistakable squeal of tires on gravel. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see Karen's Escalade backing into my driveway. Before I could react, she popped the trunk, yanked out a heavy chain, and looped it through the handles of my garage door. With a padlock click, she sealed it shut. I stormed outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She turned, smiling with a feral satisfaction. "Securing community property. That's my garage. My car. My house." "Not anymore," she said softly. "Not until this neighborhood is safe again." I pulled out my phone to call the sheriff, but she stepped closer, eyes glinting. "Go ahead. Call. But remember, this time I'll be the victim. A concerned woman trying to stop a reckless neighbor. Who do you think they'll believe?" Her confidence was chilling. She wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was escalating toward something reckless, something dangerous. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark, staring at the chained garage, realizing Karen wasn't going to stop until one of us was ruined. And in that moment, I made a decision. If she wanted war, I'd give her one. But I'd fight it on my terms, not hers. I spent the next 48 hours like a man assembling a complicated watch, quiet, meticulous, and obsessively aware of every tiny moving part. If Karen wanted a war of attrition, I would respond with a siege engine made of paperwork, witnesses, and the kind of petty legalism she worshipped. First, I cataloged everything. Every sticker, every flyer, every anonymous envelope, timestamps on every security clip. I already had footage of her breaking in and chaining the garage. Now I filled in the rest, her Escalade prowling at midnight, the moment she bolted the construction barriers, the tow truck conversation. Evidence is boring until you line it up in order, then it becomes a story that people can't ignore. I created a folder for the board, a separate packet for the sheriff, and a third, heavily annotated binder to hand out to the neighborhood. Second, I recruited allies. Not the loud, performative types who would shout at HOA meetings, but the quiet ones who actually mattered. Harlan, who remembered the bylaws and had the patience of a tax clerk. Sam, who worked nights and had an eagle eye for porch drop nonsense. Lila, our landscaper who saw every garden and noticed every inconsistency in work orders. I slid the binder across their tables like a dealer cutting cards. I didn't beg. I explained. People are rational more often than they look. They just need information presented without sermonizing. When neighbors saw side-by-side prints of Karen's nighttime prowls and her daytime, official letters, many of them sighed with the weight of recognition. I thought I was overreacting, Lila told me. Turns out I wasn't. The trick was turning evidence into pressure without looking like I was demanding vengeance. I scheduled a neighborhood picnic, one of those innocuous gatherings HOA boards are supposed to sponsor. I bribed it with good food and no speeches. When people RSVP'd, I asked a few discreet favors. Bring cameras, bring chairs, bring an open mind. I knew Karen would come. She always did. She loved audiences and the soft applause of authority. On the day of the picnic, the cul-de-sac looked like the front of a small festival. Kids were painting rocks. Someone had an inflatable cornhole set. A man from 2 houses down barbecued like he'd been training for months. Karen arrived impeccably late, hair perfect, shoes loud, clutching a stack of community safety pamphlet. She swept in, head high, ready to perform indignation. She set up a folding table, arranged her pamphlets like propaganda, and began her familiar routine, warning about property values, about strangers, about the threat I supposedly posed. A few heads nodded, the kind that give authority life. Then I did something simple and procedural. I asked her to step aside and talk privately for a minute. It sounded conciliatory, so no one suspected anything. I led her behind the gazebo and offered a glass of lemonade, the most disarming weapon I could find. While she was distracted, Harlan quietly wheeled a small projector into the clearing and set it up between 2 oaks. Sam, who'd promised to man the tech, pressed play at the exact moment I started talking about community trust and respect, phrases that made Karen preen. The projector lit the side of the clubhouse with a grainy, unavoidable image. Karen's face in the garage at 3 a.m., hand on the keypad, saying confiscate in that voice she used when she wanted something to bend. You could have heard a pin drop into a puddle. The sound from the clip filled the air. The clank of the garage door, her angry mutter, the padlock click when she chained the door. People shifted. A dozen cell phones rose, not in accusation but in recording, and a murmur like a tide moved through the crowd. Karen stared, open-mouthed, as her carefully cultivated narrative unraveled below the oaks. She tried to improvise. That is, taken out of context, she stammered. Her pamphlets fluttered like reeds behind her. But this was no HOA meeting filtered through committee fatigue. This was the cul-de-sac, the place where your neighbors saw you for what you were and had to live next to you afterwards. It was intimate and final in a way bylaws are not. Harlan stepped forward, not as an adversary but as a neighbor who had once shared coffee with her. We can't have one person deciding enforcement in the middle of the night, he said. This is about safety, not vigilante control. That quiet, reasonable sentence did more damage than any sermon. People started talking. Real, low conversation, not the applause of cliques. A woman from 2 doors down admitted she'd received one of the fake notices. A father confessed he'd seen Karen's Escalade idling outside his teenage son's window at 2 in the morning. The narrative shifted from, is he a problem? To, is she? Consider how fragile authority is. You can wield it like a club for years and then a single public evening strips the lacquer off. Karen's mask slipped. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something human. Fear, maybe, or rage at being outmaneuvered. She tried to storm off, but the crowd closed in politely, the equivalent of a social net. I didn't shout or gloat. I handed her a small packet, my legal timeline, my copies of the bylaws, and a request for mediation. We can fix this, I said, because a man who wins by humiliation becomes the kind of person everyone quietly resents. We can make the neighborhood safe without you taking unilateral action. Her response was hysterical and instructive. You framed me publicly. You humiliated me in front of my peers, she wailed. Her voice had the strange, sharp quality of someone who only learned how to feel through confrontation. And that, more than anything else, was the weakness I planned to exploit. People hate being publicly shamed, but they also hate chaos. I offered a way out that preserved both the neighborhood's dignity and, crucially, gave Karen a face-saving retreat. A formal mediation with neutral observers and a temporary suspension from enforcement duties while an independent review was conducted. She objected, of course. She threatened lawsuits, immediate appeals, and, most theatrically, defamation. But the projector had already done its work. When a dozen neighbors raised their hands to request an independent review, the board had no choice. Even the most bored of them realized a lawsuit, filed by a woman who had been caught breaking into homes, would be a circus nobody wanted to preside over. The motion passed with a polite majority. Her enforcement powers were tabled, her safety initiatives put on hold pending review. Victory felt tidy in the moment, but I knew it was delicate. People like Karen don't simply accept a demotion, they simmer. The real test would be whether the community would now back the rules she'd abused or drift back toward silence when the next petty war arose. So I didn't stop at a public shaming and a temporary suspension. I proposed 2 small, bureaucratic reforms that would make unilateral actions impossible. All enforcement requests must be submitted in writing with verifiable documentation, and a 3-person review panel had to sign off before any action could be taken. Boring, right? But boring is the best kind of change. It clamps the machinery of control into cogs so small and transparent that one person can no longer run them alone. The suspension should have ended it. Rational people, when cornered by evidence and stripped of authority, retreat. They lick their wounds, find a quieter corner, and rebuild their dignity in private. But Karen was not rational in that way. To her, the suspension was not a rebuke but an insult carved into marble. She treated it like exile, and exile demands a return. The first sign came not in broad daylight, but in the shadows. My motion cameras began picking up brief, blurry glimpses of her Escalade again, but this time she wasn't lingering. She was circling. A slow cruise at 2 a.m., headlights dimmed, gone before the alert finished buzzing on my phone. She didn't honk, didn't stop, didn't confront. She was scouting. Then came the mail. Not official notices anymore. Those avenues were closed by the new rules. Instead, anonymous letters, typed in Times New Roman, claiming my Bentley was linked to organized crime or illegally imported. They showed up in my mailbox, in Sam's, even stuffed under windshield wipers of random neighbors. Most people recognized the absurdity, but a few raised their eyebrows, the way people do when presented with gossip too juicy to ignore. Karen knew the difference between proof and suggestion. Suggestion was sometimes enough. I kept calm. I didn't chase down every rumor. I let them accumulate like a child scribbling on walls, messy, obvious, self-incriminating. What mattered was timing. The timing came courtesy of fate. One Thursday morning, the sheriff's department arrived, not because of me, but because of Karen. Someone had called in a noise complaint. Deputies walked into her backyard and found a half-built shed extending well past the property line into a neighbor's yard. No permits, no authorization, just Karen's determination that if I could have a Bentley, she could have more land. The neighbor had been too timid to confront her directly, but he hadn't been timid about calling the county. Suddenly, the woman who had accused me of disrupting community harmony was the subject of a zoning investigation. The irony was sweet, but I didn't laugh. Instead, I documented it quietly, photographed the shed, clipped the public record of the complaint, and added it to my binder. Every page told the same story. Karen, self-proclaimed guardian of the rules, breaking them whenever it suited her. The zoning issue slowed her but didn't stop her. She adapted. If she couldn't fight me legally, she'd fight socially. That weekend, she hosted a community safety brunch. Invitations were slid under doors and left on porches, all written in her imperious handwriting. The pitch was simple. Come discuss the dangerous influence of luxury excess in the neighborhood. Everyone knew who the excess belonged to. I attended. Of course I did. Walking into enemy territory is only dangerous if you walk in unprepared. I carried a slim folder, not thick enough to look defensive but substantial enough to carry weight. The brunch was held on her back patio, tables dressed with lace cloths and catered quiches that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Karen floated among the chairs like a queen entertaining courtiers. She saw me arrive, her smile faltering for half a second before she pasted on something gracious. "So glad you could come," she said through clenched teeth. The conversation around the tables was awkward at first, neighbors pretending to discuss landscaping, dog breeds, anything except the obvious. Then Karen clinked her glass and began. "We've always prided ourselves on harmony here," she announced. "But lately, certain elements threaten that harmony. Excessive vehicles, aggressive behavior, disrespect for authority. I believe we need to reaffirm what kind of neighborhood we want to be." There it was, the soft coo, the rallying cry of fear disguised as civility. A few nodded. Most stayed quiet. I waited until she finished, then stood with deliberate calm. "I agree," I said. "We do need to reaffirm who we are. Which is why I brought this." I opened my folder and handed copies down the tables. Each page showed a different moment. Karen breaking into my garage, chaining the door, erecting illegal barriers, passing out fake notices. At the back was the county record of her zoning violation. Gasps rippled down the line of chairs. Karen's face drained, then flushed crimson. "This is harassment," she snapped. "No," I said evenly. "This is evidence. Harassment is what you've been doing to me. To all of us." I gestured toward the photos. "Anyone else here receive a fake violation notice? Anyone else feel stalked by those midnight drive-bys?" Hands rose. Not timidly this time. Sam raised his first, then Lila, then 3 others. The tide turned in a way you could feel, like wind shifting before a storm. Karen tried to laugh it off. "This is all manipulated. You think he's some saint? He flaunts wealth, ignores harmony, drags down values." "And yet," I interrupted, "the bylaws have nothing against my car. They do, however, forbid unpermitted construction. They forbid harassment. They forbid false notices. We all signed those same documents." That was the kill shot. The brunch collapsed into murmurs, chairs scraping, people leaving with their copies of my packet clutched tightly. Karen shouted after them, desperate, but her words bounced off empty air. "Authority doesn't vanish slowly. It evaporates once people decide it isn't real." I thought maybe that would be the endgame. Social exile. A woman left shouting in her backyard while neighbors closed blind. But Karen wasn't done. Pride can be louder than shame. The next night, my power went out. Not the whole block, just mine. I stepped outside to find my breaker box pried open, the main switch yanked. I flipped it back, only to hear a soft laugh from the shadows. Karen, standing on her driveway, arms folded. "Accidents happen," she called. "Keep telling yourself that," I replied. I reinforced the box with a lock the next morning. But the message was clear. If she couldn't win socially or legally, she'd fight dirty. I didn't flinch. Instead, I went nuclear in the most boring way possible. I filed a restraining order. Not flashy, not cinematic, just paperwork. But the kind of paperwork that carries real consequences. With my binder as evidence, the sheriff's office didn't hesitate. The order was temporary at first, a court date scheduled for a formal hearing. Until then, Karen was legally barred from coming within 100 feet of me, my property, or my car. When the deputy delivered the order, I heard the shriek from across the street. The sound of a tyrant being told the kingdom wasn't hers anymore. The neighborhood changed overnight. People walked past her house without fear. Kids rode bikes down the street without her SUV creeping behind them. For the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt normal. But normal is fragile. As I sat on my porch that night, sipping coffee, I knew she wouldn't honor the restraining order forever. Karen was too proud, too stubborn, too certain the rules she'd wielded didn't apply to her. And when she broke it, I'd be ready. Because this war wasn't about a Bentley anymore. It was about control. And I had finally taken it away from her. The restraining order should have been a leash strong enough to hold her. For most people, the threat of fines, handcuffs, and a criminal record is enough to cool the hottest temper. But Karen wasn't most people. She was the type who believed rules were clay meant to be molded by her hands. So instead of retreating, she adjusted. She began sending proxies. The first was a delivery driver who appeared at my door with a clipboard. "Package for you," he said. The problem was the address on the box wasn't mine. It was Karen's. She had intentionally rerouted her deliveries to my house, knowing I'd refuse them, so she could claim I was tampering with her mail. I signed nothing, filmed everything, and sent the video to the sheriff's office. Strike one. Next came teenagers. 3 boys I'd never seen before showed up with lawn tools, insisting they'd been hired to clean up the yard of the Bentley guy. When I asked who had sent them, they shrugged. Some lady paid us $20. I handed each of them 10 to leave and, again, filmed the exchange. Strike 2. The third proxy was subtler. Flyers began circulating in the neighborhood, anonymous but clearly crafted in Karen's clipped, formal phrasing. They warned of escalating tensions and urged residents to prepare for inevitable consequences. The tone was half doomsday, half campaign speech, as if she thought scaring people would rally them back to her side. It didn't. Most laughed. Some tossed them in my mailbox with little notes. "Don't let her get to you." But I wasn't laughing, because underneath the absurdity was something sharper. People who lose control often turn reckless. The violation came on a Tuesday night. I was upstairs, reading, when my garage door opener buzzed. It wasn't the usual lock-in sequence. It was an override attempt, someone trying to force it open remotely. My security app pinged, confirming. Failed entry attempt, wrong code. I pulled up the live feed. There she was. Karen herself. She had finally crossed the invisible line between proxy harassment and direct violation. She was dressed in black this time, as if dark clothing could hide her identity from cameras mounted 10 feet away. She had bolt cutters in her hands and determination in her eyes. The restraining order meant nothing. She was coming for the Bentley. I called the sheriff immediately. My voice was calm, almost casual, as I explained. "Yes, the individual named in the restraining order is currently on my property with tools. Yes, I have live footage. Yes, I'll keep the line open until deputies arrive." Then I did something uncharacteristic. I stepped outside. Not to confront her, but to watch. Sometimes the most unnerving thing you can do to someone who thrives on chaos is to deny them an argument. Karen froze when she saw me leaning against the porch railing. For a second, I thought she might run. But pride is heavier than fear. She lifted the bolt cutters, shouted, "This car is a menace!" and lunged at the garage door. She didn't make it. The deputy's headlights cut across the street at that exact moment, sirens muted but lights blazing. Karen dropped the cutters like they were on fire. The arrest was efficient. Deputies reminded her of the restraining order, cuffed her hands behind her back, and read her rights. She screamed about conspiracies, about manipulated footage, about neighborhood betrayal. The sound carried through the cul-de-sac, waking half the block. Windows lit up one by one. Neighbors watched from porches, bathrobes and slippers, phones recording. 4 months she had been the queen of whispers. That night she became the spectacle. When the cruiser pulled away, I expected relief. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness. Victories against people like Karen are never final. The legal system grinds slow, appeals exist, and pride can fuel a person through humiliation like gasoline on embers. Still, for the first time, the balance of power had shifted visibly, tangibly. The next morning, the neighborhood felt lighter. Children biked in the street. A couple walked their dog past Karen's house without quickening their pace. People waved to me with a kind of cautious gratitude, like I'd slayed a dragon but might still be smoldering. I didn't celebrate publicly. I kept my routine. Work, yard, mail. The only indulgence I allowed myself was washing the Bentley in full view of the street, sunlight glinting off the hood. It wasn't about showing off, it was about normalizing what Karen had tried to weaponize. A car is just a car until someone obsesses over it. But Karen wasn't gone. Within 24 hours, her husband bailed her out. By the weekend, she was back in her house, curtains drawn, Escalade parked like a wounded beast. She didn't drive it. She didn't prowl. She simmered. And then, late Saturday night, the silence broke. I was dozing in the living room when I heard a thud. Not outside. Inside. I jolted upright, checked the cameras, and saw nothing unusual. Then I realized the sound had come from the garage. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against it. Another thud, followed by a muffled curse. My heart spiked. She was inside. The lock-in system had triggered again, only this time she hadn't tripped. It had. She'd found some way to sneak in, maybe through the side door she thought I never reinforced. But once inside, the system had caught her, just as it had weeks earlier. I pulled up the live feed. There she was, disheveled, frantic, pulling at the locked door with bare hands, her face twisted in panic. The difference this time was the restraining order. She wasn't just trespassing, she was committing a felony. I didn't rush to open the door. I didn't slide in a bottle of water. I called the sheriff again, my voice steady as stone. She's in my garage. Yes, again. Yes, I have footage. Please hurry. While I waited, I sat in the kitchen, listening to her muffled screams. There was something poetic about it. Her obsession had brought her full circle, back to the place where this saga had begun, trapped by the same system she thought she could outsmart. When the deputies arrived, they didn't need me to explain. They saw the live footage, unlocked the garage, and pulled her out like a fish thrashing on a hook. This time, there was no yelling, no grand proclamations. Just sobbing. Ugly, unrestrained sobbing. The cruiser pulled away, and the neighborhood exhaled. You could feel it, like pressure dropping before a storm. Neighbors clapped me on the shoulder, murmured thanks, and drifted back inside. I stood in the driveway long after the lights faded, staring at the locked garage, at the Bentley glinting under the fluorescent glow. Karen was gone, at least for now. But pride like hers doesn't vanish, it calcifies. I knew she would find a way to return. The question was not if, but how. And I was ready. Because when someone builds their identity on control, losing it is worse than punishment. It's annihilation. And people facing annihilation do desperate things. The night after Karen's second arrest, the cul-de-sac felt like a church after midnight mass. Quiet, reverent, expectant. Curtains that had been drawn tight for months now swayed open, neighbors daring to peek out as though the spell had been broken. The air itself seemed freer. For the first time since the Bentley had rolled into my garage, I felt like I could breathe without checking over my shoulder. But people like Karen don't disappear just because a cruiser door slams. They linger. Their energy stains the walls they've lived in, seeps into the cracks of every conversation. Even behind bars, I could feel her presence, like a storm cloud hovering just beyond the horizon. 3 days passed. Her Escalade stayed parked in the driveway, silent and unmoving. Her husband came and went, shoulders slumped, avoiding eye contact. The board called an emergency session, this time without her, and voted unanimously to expel her from any enforcement role permanently. The restraining order was upgraded from temporary to full. Neighbors who once whispered began to speak openly, trading stories of Karen's antics with the relief of survivors finally allowed to compare scars. Still, I wasn't naive. Pride doesn't collapse into dust, it mutates. And Karen's pride was her oxygen. The mutation came in the form of a letter. Not typed, not anonymous, but handwritten, slid into my mailbox late one night. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, that choking floral fog she wore like armor. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. "You've ruined everything," it began. "They listen to you now. They think I'm crazy. But I'll show them who really runs this neighborhood. You won't win. Not in the end. No threats of lawsuits this time. No citations. Just raw fury, stripped of legalese, scribbled like a warning from someone teetering on the edge. I photographed it, filed it with the rest of the evidence, and waited. The waiting ended faster than I expected. At 2 in the morning, the cameras triggered. Not just one, every single one. Front yard, back fence, side gate, garage. The motion alerts pinged in rapid succession, a digital drumroll. I pulled up the live feed, and my stomach tightened. Karen was back. Not alone this time. 2 shadowy figures flanked her, men built broad, moving with deliberate steps. She had gone from harassment to recruitment. They carried crowbars. I dialed the sheriff before adrenaline even hit my veins. My voice was steady, rehearsed from months of practice. She's here again. With 2 men. Breaking and entering. I have it all on live feed. The dispatcher told me deputies were on their way. But I knew response time, even at its best, meant minutes. Minutes are long when 3 intruders are circling your house. I moved methodically. Killed the interior lights. Slid the deadbolt. Checked the reinforced lock on the garage door. The Bentley gleamed under its cover like a jewel waiting in a vault. I wasn't going to lose it. Not to Karen. Not to anyone. Through the feed, I watched her direct the men like a general. One pried at the side gate while the other tested the back door. Karen herself marched straight to the garage, bolt cutters in hand again. Her obsession was blinding. She wanted the car, the symbol, the victory she'd been denied. And then, the system triggered. The lock-in engaged the moment the garage door cracked under their tools. The heavy mechanism slammed shut behind them with a boom that shook the walls. Lights blazed inside, bright as interrogation lamp. Sirens, silent to me, but deafening inside, flared red and blue. They hadn't broken into a garage. They'd stepped into a cage. I watched from my phone as chaos erupted inside. Karen screamed orders, but the men were panicked animals, pounding on the walls, jerking at the locked door. They hadn't expected resistance, and certainly not from technology. Their faces twisted in fear as the sirens pulsed. And then the real sirens arrived. Deputies stormed the driveway, flashlights sweeping. They didn't hesitate. They saw the figures trapped inside, confirmed my footage, and moved in. The garage door rolled open on command, and Karen staggered out first, eyes wild, hair matted. The men followed, hands raised, realizing the only escape was compliance. The deputies cuffed them all. Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "You don't understand. He's poisoned you all. That car is a menace. This is my neighborhood. Mine." Her words were hollow now. They didn't command, didn't persuade. They scattered like leaves in the wind. The deputies read her rights again, more tired than angry. The men were silent, their alliance with her already cracking under the weight of handcuffs. Neighbors spilled out onto porches, phones raised, whispers turning into commentary. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a reckoning. I stood on my porch, arms folded, watching the scene unfold. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave. I simply let the sight of her being driven away burn itself into memory. The queen of the HOA, the self-appointed guardian of harmony, dragged off not by gossip or bylaws, but by the very law she'd weaponized against others. The aftermath was swift. The board held a vote to strip her of membership altogether. The county pressed charges, not just for trespassing, but for conspiracy and violation of a restraining order. Her husband put the house up for sale within a week, a for sale sign stabbing the lawn like a white flag. The neighborhood changed in subtle ways. People talked more freely, organized block parties without fear of her disapproval. Flyers went up for bake sales and yard sales without being ripped down. Trash bins stayed out a little longer without angry notes appearing. Harmony, the kind she claimed to protect, bloomed only in her absence. As for me, I drove the Bentley down the street one Sunday afternoon, sunlight bouncing off the hood. Neighbors waved. Kids pointed. Not in envy, not in resentment, just in recognition that the car was no longer a symbol of conflict, but of endurance. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon and thought about Karen. People like her never see themselves as villains. They cast themselves as martyrs, misunderstood heroes fighting ungrateful crowds. Maybe in her mind, she'd convinced herself she was protecting something worth protecting. But in the end, pride had hollowed her out. Pride had turned neighbors into enemies, bylaws into weapons, and a car into an obsession that consumed her. She tripped into my garage once and got locked in by accident. The second time was pride. The third time was desperation. Each step, bigger than the last, until the cage shut for good. The irony is that she had always claimed to fight for harmony. But real harmony only arrived the day she was gone. And as I watched the street that night, quiet, calm, ordinary, I realized that the most powerful victories don't come with cheers or gloating. They come with silence. The kind of silence that tells you the war is over, and you've won.